In the drought-stricken valley of Ban Phra Nam, the sky forgot how to rain, and the earth began to remember something far older than water. When desperation drove the villagers to awaken an ancient rain-calling ritual. They believed they were begging the heavens for mercy. But some prayers do not rise. They sink. And something beneath the thirsty soil was listening. Tonight, we tell the story of a village that begged for rain, and was answered. Chapter 1. The Village Without Rain. Ban Phra Nam lay hidden in a shallow basin of cracked earth in northeastern Thailand. A place the maps marked but travelers rarely visited. The land had forgotten rain. For 6 relentless months, the sky hung like a sheet of pale metal. Unmoving, indifferent, and cruelly empty. The rice paddies had split open into deep fissures that ran across the fields like festering wounds. Each step across the ground released a dry, brittle crunch, as if the earth itself were turning to bone. Water jars stood overturned beside houses, their insides coated with dust instead of moisture. The village well, once a place of gossip and laughter, now revealed only a dark throat lined with stone and silence. Dead fish lay curled at the bottom like forgotten offerings. Even the buffalo, stubborn creatures of mud and marsh, had collapsed in the shade of skeletal trees, their hides stretched tight over ribs, their empty eyes clouded with flies. No birds circled overhead. No frogs sang at night. Even the wind had abandoned the valley. As the drought deepened, the villagers stopped speaking in full sentences. Words required energy, and hope required more. They moved slowly, conserving strength. Their skin darkened by sun and dust. Their lips cracked and bleeding. Children no longer played in the open paths. They sat beside doorways, watching the horizon as if waiting for something that refused to arrive. But the elders had begun whispering. They gathered at dusk beneath the leaning spirit house at the edge of the village. Their voices low and trembling. They spoke of a ritual older than memory, older than the temple, older than the first rice planted in the valley. A ritual their grandparents had forbidden, and their grandparents before them had feared. A ritual not meant to summon rain, but to bargain for it. Some said the last time it was performed, the rains came in torrents that drowned the fields and carried away livestock, shrines, and 3 entire families. Others claimed the water that fell had been warm and carried the smell of rot. No one agreed on the details. Yet every telling ended the same way. The ritual was buried. The altar burned, and the knowledge forbidden. Because the rain had not come alone. That evening, as the sun bled into a dull red smear along the horizon, old May Pranee traced a trembling finger across the cracked soil and whispered the words her mother once warned her never to repeat. If the earth cannot drink water. Her voice faltered. The windless air seemed to tighten around the listening villagers. The earth will drink blood. No one spoke after that. Far beneath the split and lifeless fields, something shifted in the darkness, slow, patient, and newly awake. And above Ban Phra Nam, the sky remained empty. Chapter 2. The Monk's Warning. Wat Nong Kham stood at the far edge of Ban Phra Nam, where the last cluster of houses gave way to brittle grass and fields that had forgotten how to live. The temple had once been the village's refuge, a place of chanting, incense smoke, and gentle bells drifting through the morning air. Now, its paint peeled in curling strips. Its prayer flags hung limp and colorless, and the wind chimes above the entrance had not rung in months. Inside the ordination hall, the air felt strangely heavy, as though sound itself struggled to move. Luang Por Chai, the temple's elderly abbot, knelt before the main Buddha image, his spine bent with age but his gaze steady. He had lived through floods, famine, and sickness, yet he had never known a silence like the one pressing against the temple walls now. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of something waiting. When the village elders arrived, he did not turn to greet them. "I know why you've come," he said quietly. Their bare feet scuffed against the floorboards. No one dared speak first. Finally, Somchai, the village headman, cleared his throat. "The people are desperate. Luang Por. The fields are dying. The children have no water. We have no choice." At last, the monk turned. His eyes, milky with age yet piercing, searched their faces one by one. "You speak of the old Rite," he said. No one answered, but their silence was confession enough. Luang Por Chai closed his eyes briefly, as if in prayer or resignation. "That ritual is not a prayer," he said, "it is a bargain." A murmur rippled through the men. "The rain it brings," the monk continued, "does not fall from heaven. It rises from beneath." The air in the hall seemed to grow colder. Somchai forced a thin smile. "With respect, Luang Por, these are old superstitions. People need hope." The monk's voice hardened. "What you call hope, others once called a doorway." He gestured toward the fields beyond the temple walls. "There are things that sleep beneath thirsty earth. When the land cracks, their dreams grow thin. When blood touches soil, they awaken." One of the elders shifted uneasily. Another made a protective gesture under his breath. Luang Por Chai leaned closer, his voice lowering to a rasp. "The last time the ritual was performed, the rain came, yes, but so did the voices. So did the dreams, and those who walked into the fields at night did not walk back." A sudden thud echoed through the hall. All heads turned. From the altar, a thin dark line traced down the cheek of the Buddha statue. Then another. And another. The elders stared, breath caught in their throats, as black liquid seeped from the statue's stone eyes and slid slowly down its serene face. No one moved. No one spoke. Outside, the sky remained a lifeless white. Inside, the monk whispered a prayer that trembled with fear. But beneath the temple floor, deeper than roots and older than memory, something listened and seemed to recognize its name.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The Headman's Dream. Sleep did not come easily to Somchai. The village headman lay on a woven mat in the dark interior of his wooden house, listening to the dry creak of bamboo beams expanding in the night heat. The air was thick and unmoving. Even the insects, once relentless in their chorus, had fallen silent, as though the drought had stolen not only water, but sound itself. He turned onto his side. Sweat clung to his neck. His tongue felt swollen against the roof of his mouth. Outside, the fields stretched into darkness, cracked and waiting. When sleep finally came, it did not come gently. He stood barefoot in the middle of the rice paddies. The ground beneath his feet was no longer dry. It was soft, damp, breathing. Each step released a wet sucking sound, as though the earth resented being touched. A sour smell rose from the soil, thick with rot and something older, something that did not belong to the living world. The sky above him churned in slow, unnatural spirals, neither night nor day, but a dim, suffocating gray. He tried to call out. No sound left his throat. Then he saw her. A woman stood at the far end of the field where the cracked land met a line of dead trees. Her hair hung forward, long and black, veiling her face. Her clothes clung to her body, heavy with mud and dripping water that should not have existed in such a barren place. She did not walk toward him. The distance between them simply shrank. With each blink, she stood closer. The air grew colder. Somchai felt mud seeping between his toes, thick and clinging, as though hands beneath the soil were slowly wrapping around his feet. When she stopped an arm's length away, the smell hit him, stagnant water, drowned leaves, and the sickly sweetness of decay. Her head tilted. Water dripped steadily from the ends of her hair. "Do you want the rain?" she asked. Her voice sounded layered, as if many mouths spoke beneath the surface of the words. "Or do you want to live?" Somchai tried to step back, but his legs would not move. The mud had tightened around his ankles. Her hair shifted. For a fraction of a second, he glimpsed skin the color of soaked ash, and eyes that were not eyes, but pale hollows filled with dark water. The ground pulsed beneath him. Something tugged. Hard. He awoke with a violent gasp. The darkness of his home pressed in around him. His chest heaved as he struggled to breathe. For a moment, he could still smell the rot. Then he realized his hands were clenched. Mud packed the creases of his palms, wet and black, seeping between his fingers and dripping onto the bamboo floor. Somchai stared in numb disbelief. He had washed before sleeping. Outside, a wind began to rise, the first in many months. whispering across the dead fields like a distant voice trying to remember how to speak. And far beneath the cracked earth of Ban Phra Nam, something stirred, as if answering a call it had been waiting to hear again. Chapter 4. The Buried Rite. The decision was not spoken aloud. Yet by morning the entire village seemed to move with a single, silent intention. They gathered at the abandoned communal hall at the edge of Ban Phra Nam, a sagging wooden structure half swallowed by weeds and dust. Once, it had hosted weddings, harvest feasts, and New Year dances. Now its floorboards warped under the weight of years and neglect, and the spirit shrine at its entrance leaned sideways, its offerings long since turned to powder. Somchai stood in the doorway, his dreams still clinging to him like damp cloth. "Dig," he said. No one asked why. The elders claimed the instructions had been passed down generations ago. If the land dies, return to where the first plea was buried. Men brought rusted hoes and cracked shovels. Women knelt to clear debris by hand. The children were kept away, though they watched from a distance, silent and wide-eyed. The soil beneath the hall was hard as fired clay. Each strike of metal against earth rang with a dull, hollow note. After nearly an hour, one of the men's tools struck something that did not sound like stone. A wooden lid. They uncovered a small chest wrapped in decayed cloth and bound with brittle twine blackened by age. No one reached for it at first. The air around the object felt strangely cool, despite the oppressive heat of the morning. Somchai knelt and cut the binding. Inside lay a folded sheet of darkened leather, stiff and cracked but preserved by dryness. Strange symbols had been etched into its surface in faded pigment the color of dried blood. Around the edges, the leather bore water stains shaped like spreading fingers. Luang Por Chai's warning echoed in Somchai's mind. A bargain. One of the elders whispered a prayer. Another made a sign to ward off spirits. Somchai unfolded the leather. The instructions were written in an archaic script, older than the temple itself. Some passages had been annotated in a later hand, desperate additions from those who had performed the rite long ago. It described a ritual to summon rain through the awakening of the guardian beneath the thirsting earth. A column must be raised at the center of the dead field. Offerings must be given to awaken the sleeper. Blood must touch soil. A voice unstained by sin must call the rain. At the bottom, the symbols changed, jagged, frantic, as if carved by trembling hands. The final portion had been torn away. Only a fragment remained. And when the rain answers, the debt. The rest was missing. A hot wind swept through the broken hall, lifting dust into spiraling threads. The leather sheet shuddered in Somchai's hands as if reacting to breath that was not there. One of the younger men swallowed hard. Who tore it? No one answered. Outside, the cracked fields shimmered in the rising heat. From somewhere beneath the floor, or perhaps from deep within the earth below, came a faint sound. Not movement. Not quite. More like a slow, patient shifting, as if something long confined had sensed that the door above it was being opened once more. Somchai folded the leather carefully, though his fingers trembled. "We begin tonight," he said. Behind the hall, a thin line split the earth with a dry, splitting sound. And for a fleeting moment, from within that narrow fracture, a breath of cold air escaped, carrying the faint smell of stagnant water and something that had waited far too long.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The Chosen Child. By late afternoon, the heat lay over Ban Phra Nam like a suffocating blanket. The sky remained a merciless white, but the light felt dim, as though the sun itself were weakening, or watching from behind a veil. Word spread without voices. Doors opened, then closed. Curtains shifted. Eyes lingered a moment too long on a single house near the dying fields. The old rite required a voice unstained by sin, an innocent intermediary who would call the rain between the world of the living and whatever waited beneath the soil. No one wanted to say the name. Yet everyone knew it. Molly lived alone in a narrow wooden hut at the far edge of the village, where the cracked paddies began. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with hair often tangled by the wind and eyes too observant for a child who had already buried both parents. Villagers left rice at her doorstep, mended her clothes, and avoided meeting her gaze for too long, as if grief itself were contagious. When Samchai approached her house, the elders followed at a careful distance, their footsteps slow and uncertain. Molly sat on the threshold, drawing lines in the dust with a twig. She looked up before anyone spoke. "You came late," she said. Samchai paused. "Late for what?" She tilted her head, listening to something none of them could hear. "The woman in the field said you would come when the ground began to breathe." The elders shifted uneasily. Samchai forced calm into his voice. "What woman?" Molly pointed toward the cracked paddies behind her house. "She stands where the earth is broken. Her feet sink, but she never falls." A wind stirred across the dry fields, carrying a faint smell of damp rot that vanished as quickly as it came. Samchai crouched so his eyes met the child's. "Molly," he said gently, "tonight the village will pray for rain. We need someone pure of heart to lead the prayer." She studied him in silence. There was no fear in her expression, only a solemn curiosity. As though she were deciding whether to accept an invitation already foretold. "The rain is not lost," she said quietly. "It is being held." A chill moved through the gathered elders despite the heat. "Held by who?" one of them whispered. Molly's gaze drifted past them, toward the fields. "She is thirsty," the child replied. "She has been thirsty for a very long time." The bamboo walls of the hut creaked softly, though the air was still. Samchai swallowed. "Will you help us?" Molly looked down at the lines she had drawn in the dust. They were not random shapes, he realized now, but spirals intersected by jagged marks resembling cracks in dry earth. Or fractures spreading across bone. After a long silence, she nodded. That night, as the sun sank behind the skeletal trees, the villagers prepared offerings. Chickens were bound, bowls were arranged, the ritual column lay ready beside the field. Inside her hut, Molly sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the thin wall facing the paddies. A wet imprint slowly formed on the wood from the outside, as if a mud-soaked hand pressed gently against it. The child did not scream. She only whispered, "You can come closer when the drums begin." Outside, the first drumbeat sounded across Ban Phra Nam. And beneath the cracked earth, something answered with a slow, awakening pulse. Chapter 6. The Night of Preparation. Dusk fell over Ban Phra Nam not as a fading of light, but as a slow suffocation of it. The horizon dimmed into a bruised violet haze, and the brittle silhouettes of dead trees stretched across the fields like blackened fingers clawing at the sky. No one lit cooking fires that evening. Smoke felt like an insult to the empty heavens. Instead, the villagers moved in near silence toward the dead paddies, carrying tools, rope, bowls, and offerings wrapped in cloth. Their footsteps stirred pale dust that lingered in the air, refusing to settle, as though the land itself resisted disturbance. At the center of the largest cracked field, a pit had been dug where the soil split deepest. From this wound in the earth rose the ritual column, a rough-hewn wooden post darkened by age and wrapped with fraying red cloth. No one could remember when it had last stood upright. Some claimed the wood came from a tree struck by lightning decades ago. Others insisted it had never been a tree at all. Samchai helped guide it into place. As the base slid into the pit, a low vibration passed through the ground beneath their feet, subtle, but unmistakable. Several villagers froze. "Did you feel that?" one whispered. No one answered. They packed the soil tightly around the post, though the earth felt strangely loose, almost damp, despite months of drought. When Samchai pressed his palm against the ground, the dirt yielded slightly, like flesh that had been sleeping too long. The offerings were arranged in a careful circle. Bowls of uncooked rice, bundles of dried herbs, 3 clay jars of stagnant well water, and a woven tray holding a bound white chicken whose eyes gleamed with silent terror. The air thickened as darkness settled. No insects sang. No leaves stirred. Then the dogs began to howl. It started with one thin cry from the far end of the village. Another answered, then another, until the sound spread in ragged waves across Ban Phra Nam. The howls were not the sharp warnings of watchdogs but long, mournful keening, as if the animals sensed a presence approaching from a distance too deep to see. The children were kept indoors, yet some pressed their faces to gaps in bamboo walls, watching shadows move toward the fields. At the edge of the ritual ground, Molly stood beside Luang Por Chai, who had come despite his earlier warnings. His prayer beads trembled between his fingers. "You must stop this," he murmured to Somchai. But Somchai's gaze remained fixed on the column. "The rain will come," he said. Above them, clouds gathered for the first time in months, thin at first, like smoke seeping into the sky. A warm wind swept across the field. Then another. The second wind carried a smell that made several villagers recoil: stagnant water, wet soil, and something faintly metallic. Blood. One of the clay jars trembled and tipped, spilling a thin stream of murky water onto the ground. The soil drank it instantly. A dark patch spread outward, seeping between cracks, vanishing into depths that should have been dry. Luang Por Chai began to chant under his breath. The red cloth wrapped around the ritual column stirred, though the air had fallen still. Far below the packed earth, something shifted, slow and vast, displacing pockets of ancient air that rose through unseen fissures in soft, damp exhalations. The villagers felt it as pressure in their ears, as weight in their chests, as a silence so deep it seemed to press against the inside of their skulls. Molly lifted her face toward the darkening sky. "It's waking," she whispered. No thunder followed. No lightning split the horizon. Yet beneath their feet, the ground gave a faint, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat not meant for the living. And the first drumbeat sounded.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. The First Invocation. Night settled fully over Ban Phra Nam, thick and absolute, swallowing the last trace of twilight. No stars appeared. The sky hung low and swollen with unmoving clouds, sealing the village beneath a ceiling of suffocating darkness. At the center of the dead field, the ritual column stood like a black spine driven into the earth. Villagers formed a wide circle around it. No one spoke above a whisper. Even breath seemed too loud for the moment pressing in upon them. Then the drum began. A single hollow beat. Thump. The sound rolled outward across the cracked paddies and returned in a faint, delayed echo, as if the earth itself were repeating the rhythm from below. Thump. Another strike followed, slow and deliberate. The drummer, an old man whose hands trembled in daylight, now moved with mechanical steadiness, his eyes unfocused, his body swaying to a tempo older than memory. Thump, thump. With each beat, the air seemed to thicken. The villagers felt it pressing against their skin, filling their ears, settling into their lungs like damp fog. Molly stepped forward. Her small bare feet touched the dark soil within the circle. She did not look at the villagers. She looked only at the column wrapped in red cloth, as if listening to something whispering from its splintered grain. Luang Por Chai's chanting faltered. Somchai nodded. The bound chicken was brought forward. Its wings strained weakly against the cords, but it made no sound. A knife flashed briefly in torchlight. When the blade cut, the smell came first, sharp, metallic, startlingly alive in the stagnant air. Blood spilled into a shallow clay bowl, dark and thick, steaming faintly as if the night itself were cold. The drumbeat did not stop. Somchai lifted the bowl with both hands. For a moment, his reflection trembled on the surface of the blood, distorted by each vibration of the drum. He poured. The liquid struck the soil at the base of the column with a soft, wet sound. The ground shuddered. Not violently. Not visibly. But undeniably. The blood did not soak into the earth. It slid across the surface, drawn into the cracks like thin fingers reaching downward, vanishing into darkness that seemed deeper than the shallow fissures should allow. The drumbeat slowed. A wind rose without warning, cold and sharp, cutting through the heat that had suffocated the village for months. Torches flickered violently, their flames bending toward the ground as if pressed by unseen hands. Then they went out. All of them. Darkness swallowed the field. A murmur rippled through the circle. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone began to sob. From beneath the earth came a sound. Not movement. Not quite. A low, layered vibration, like distant voices speaking through thick water. No one understood the language. Yet every villager felt the meaning slide cold and heavy into their bones. Molly's lips parted. She spoke softly, repeating sounds that did not belong to any human tongue. The syllables flowed through her like water through a broken reed, ancient, fluid, and terribly calm. The ground beneath the ritual column pulsed. Once. Twice. The smell of wet soil rose into the air. Sanchai felt moisture touch his bare foot. He looked down. The dust-dark earth had turned slick beneath him, glistening faintly in the darkness, as though something below was exhaling water through unseen pores. The drum gave one final strike. Thump. Silence followed. Deep. Total. Then, from somewhere far below the roots of the world, something answered. And the night held its breath. Chapter 8. The Wind That Did Not Belong. For a long moment after the final drumbeat, the darkness remained absolute. No one moved. No one breathed deeply. It felt as if the entire field, the entire valley, had slipped into a space between heartbeats. Then the wind arrived. It did not descend from the sky. It rose. A thin current of air pushed upward through the cracks in the earth, whispering through the soil before spilling across the ritual ground. It coiled around bare ankles and crept beneath clothing, cold and damp, carrying the unmistakable scent of stagnant water sealed away for centuries. Several villagers gasped. This wind did not cool the skin. It leached warmth from bone. Torches refused to relight. Their wicks smoldered weakly, releasing thin threads of smoke that drifted sideways, then downward, as though gravity itself had shifted. Molly stood motionless before the column, her hair stirring though the air above remained still. Luang Por Chai clutched his prayer beads, whispering urgently now, each syllable trembling against the oppressive silence. His chant seemed swallowed before traveling more than a few inches from his lips. Sanchai strained his ears. There was another sound beneath the wind. A low murmur. Layered. Fluid. Like many voices speaking underwater. The sound did not come from one direction. It seeped upward from every crack in the ground, surrounding the villagers in a soft, relentless susurration. Someone covered their ears. It did not help. The whispers did not travel through air. They traveled through flesh. Through marrow. Through memory. One woman dropped to her knees, shaking her head violently as if to dislodge the voices filling her skull. Another began to laugh, a thin, brittle sound that broke into sobbing. The wind intensified. Red cloth wrapped around the ritual column fluttered violently now, snapping as though caught in a storm no one could see. Yet beyond the circle, the dead grasses remained motionless. Molly tilted her head, listening. "They are asking," she murmured. Sanchai swallowed. "Asking what?" Her voice remained soft, distant. "Why we waited so long." The ground released a soft, wet exhale. Moisture seeped through the soil, darkening the dust. The cracks that had split the earth for months began to glisten faintly, reflecting what little light remained. Then the temperature dropped. Breath fogged in the air. A collective shudder moved through the villagers. From the darkness beyond the ritual circle came a slow dragging sound, as if something heavy were being pulled across wet ground. Sanchai peered into the blackness. There was nothing. The sound continued. Closer now. Wet. Deliberate. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a dense, unintelligible chorus that pressed against the inside of his skull. Luang Por Chai raised his voice in prayer, forcing the sacred syllables into the suffocating air. For an instant, the whispers faltered, not silenced, but listening. Then the wind stopped. Not gradually. Instantly. The silence that followed rang louder than any storm. Molly's eyes widened slightly, fixed on the soil at the base of the column. The earth there had begun to swell. Slowly. As if something beneath the surface were pressing upward with patient strength. A thin line of black liquid seeped through the dirt and traced a trembling path across the ground. The villagers stared, frozen between awe and terror. From deep below, a sound emerged, thick and viscous, like mud shifting in a drowned riverbed. The soil bulged again. Higher. Straining. And somewhere far beneath Ban Phra Nam, something that had slept through generations of drought opened what might once have been its eyes. The first bubble broke the surface of the earth with a soft, wet pop.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The Woman Beneath the Mud. The swelling earth did not burst open all at once. It rose slowly, grotesquely, as though the ground itself had grown a breath that it no longer knew how to contain. The mud-dark soil at the base of the ritual columns stretched and split, releasing a thick, glistening seep of blackened water that smelled of rot, drowned roots, and something long sealed away from air. No one dared move. The villagers stood frozen in a widening ring, their faces drained of color, their eyes reflecting the faint sheen of moisture spreading across the once dead field. The surface quivered. A bubble formed, trembled, and collapsed with a soft, wet sound. Then the earth broke. A hand pushed through. It emerged slowly, forcing its way upward through the mud with patient strength. The skin was gray-black and swollen, the fingers elongated and slick with soil that clung like rotting flesh. The nails were split and dark, packed with centuries of dirt. Someone screamed. The sound died instantly in the suffocating air. The hand did not grasp wildly. It pressed against the ground with deliberate pressure, as if testing the weight of the world above it. Another bubble surfaced beside it. Then a second arm forced its way upward, joints bending at angles that suggested long confinement rather than natural motion. The soil sloughed away. The shape beneath continued rising. Mud slid from a hunched shoulder. A head began to surface. Long strands of black hair, heavy with wet earth, spilled forward, veiling the face. Water streamed continuously from the tangled mass. Though no rain had yet fallen, it dripped in slow, thick threads, striking the mud below with soft, rhythmic taps. The smell intensified. Stagnant water. Sour decay. The faint metallic tang of blood diluted beyond memory. Molly did not step back. Her small figure stood unmoving before the column, eyes fixed on the emerging shape as if recognizing something the others could not. The head lifted. Hair clung to hollow cheeks the color of drowned ash. Skin sagged loosely against bone. Where the eyes should have been, pale membranes glistened beneath half-closed lids, clouded and filmed with black fluid. The mouth opened. Thick water spilled out, pouring down the chin in a slow, continuous stream, as though the body were a vessel filled beyond its limit. The whispers returned at once. Not from the earth now. From the figure itself. Layered voices seeped from its open mouth, overlapping in tones too deep, too distant, too numerous to belong to a single throat. The sound vibrated in the villagers' bones rather than their ears. One man collapsed, clawing at his chest as if his heart were trying to flee. Another began muttering prayers in broken fragments. The woman's head tilted sharply to one side. The motion was insect-like, abrupt and unnatural. Her lips moved again. Water poured faster. The mud around her torso shifted as more of her form rose into view, revealing a body wrapped in tatters of fabric fused to the skin by time and decay. The cloth pulsed faintly, as though currents moved beneath it. Somchai could not breathe. Every instinct screamed for him to run, yet his legs felt buried to the knee in invisible weight. The pale membranes over the woman's eyes twitched. Slowly, they lifted. Dark water pooled where pupils should have been, trembling like deep wells stirred by distant movement. The ground beneath the villagers gave a faint, answering pulse. Molly spoke softly, her voice barely more than breath. "You heard us." The woman's mouth stretched wider. The whispers surged into a low, fluid chorus. From within that drowning sound came a single phrase, layered and ancient, vibrating through flesh and marrow alike. "Thirst, remembered." The sky above groaned. A cold drop struck Somchai's shoulder. Then another. The first rain in 6 months began to fall. Behind the villagers, the cracked earth continued to soften, slowly collapsing inward, as though the land itself were making room for what had risen, and for what might still follow. Chapter 10. The First Rain. The first drop struck Somchai's shoulder with a weight that felt almost deliberate. He flinched. For a heartbeat, no one moved, as though the entire village feared that even acknowledging the rain might cause it to vanish. Then another drop fell, darkening the dust at their feet. A third struck the ritual column, leaving a glistening trail as it slid down the weathered wood. A murmur rose from the villagers, fragile, disbelieving. Rain. At last. The sky released more. Drops fell slowly at first, each one thick and heavy, striking the earth with soft, damp taps. The scent of moisture spread through the air, and several villagers fell to their knees, weeping openly as they pressed their palms into the softening soil. It has come, someone sobbed. It has come back. The drought was breaking. The cracked paddies began to darken as the rain intensified, water threading into fissures that had gaped open for months. Dust dissolved into slick mud beneath bare feet. The villagers lifted their faces to the sky, letting the drops strike their skin, their lips, their closed eyelids. But the relief lasted only seconds. The smell arrived next. Not the clean scent of monsoon rain. Not the green promise of renewal. This rain carried the odor of stagnant ponds, of rotting vegetation sealed beneath black water, and a faint copper tang that clung to the back of the throat. Somchai wiped his face and stared at his wet fingers. The droplets were darker than they should have been. Beside him, a woman rubbed her arms and frowned. "It burns," she whispered. Others began to murmur. The rain thickened, falling faster now, soaking clothing and hair within moments. Where it touched exposed skin, a prickling sensation spread, not pain exactly, but a crawling irritation, as though countless invisible needles pressed lightly against the flesh. A child cried out from the edge of the field. Luang Por Chai raised his sleeve to shield his face, his lips moving in urgent prayer. Rainwater streaked down his forehead, leaving faint gray trails across his skin. The woman rising from the mud remained motionless, rain striking her without effect. Water streamed from her hair in continuous rivulets, indistinguishable from the rain itself. Her open mouth continued to pour dark liquid. The whispers had softened but not vanished. They pulsed beneath the sound of rainfall, a submerged chorus threading through the steady patter. The soil beneath the villagers' feet softened rapidly, turning slick and unstable. Each step produced a wet-sucking sound as mud clung to ankles and toes. Somchai looked toward the horizon. The rain did not fall beyond the valley. A gray curtain descended only over Ban Phra Nam, its edges sharply defined, as if the storm had been placed carefully over the village alone. Thunder did not follow. Lightning did not split the sky. The clouds remained low and silent, their bellies swollen but strangely still. A man stumbled and fell to his knees, clutching his forearms. Red welts had begun to rise across his skin where the rain struck hardest. "It's wrong," he gasped. Nearby, the surface of the field water rippled though no wind blew. Dark swirls twisted through the forming puddles, spiraling downward into depths too dark for such shallow pools. Molly lifted her hands, letting the rain collect in her palms. She watched the liquid gather, her expression unreadable. "It remembers," she whispered. Somchai turned sharply. "What does?" But she did not answer. The rain intensified into a steady downpour. Within minutes, the ritual circle had become a shallow basin of blackening water. The offerings floated, turning slowly in widening rings. The blood that had soaked into the soil began to rise back to the surface in faint reddish streaks, dissolving into the murky flood. The villagers backed away, unease replacing relief. The drought had ended. But the rain did not feel like mercy. Above them, the clouds pressed lower. Below them, the earth continued to soften and sink, as though the land were dissolving into something that had waited a very long time to rise. And in the pooling water at their feet, reflections trembled, not entirely matching the shapes of those who stood above them.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. The Earth Drinks. By morning, the rain had not stopped. It fell in a steady gray curtain over Ban Phra Nam, neither storm nor drizzle, but an unbroken descent that erased edges, softened distances, and turned the village into a blurred shadow beneath the low, Unmoving sky. Water pooled in the paddies, filling the long cracked wounds of the earth until the fields became shallow black mirrors. The mud swallowed footprints within seconds. The narrow paths between houses dissolved into slick channels of dark slurry that clung to ankles like grasping fingers. No birds returned. No frogs sang. Only rain. Inside their homes, villagers sat in damp silence, listening to the endless patter on bamboo roofs. Relief had come, yet sleep had not. Many had spent the night awake, scratching at skin irritated by the strange rain, whispering prayers, or staring into darkness that seemed to breathe. Shortly after dawn, the first man was reported missing. Prosert, a farmer whose house stood closest to the ritual field, had left before sunrise to check the rising water level. His wife found the door ajar and his sandals still on the threshold. Samchai organized a search. Rain soaked them within moments as they moved toward the paddies. The air smelled of wet soil and stagnant pools left too long untouched. Each step into the field released bubbles that rose and burst with soft, unpleasant sounds. They found the tracks quickly. Bare footprints led into the mud, each impression filling slowly with dark water. The stride was uneven, as though he had walked reluctantly, or been pulled. The trail stopped near the center of the flooded field. There, the mud had churned into a wide, disturbed circle. No returning footprints. Only deep grooves etched into the soft earth, dragging outward before vanishing beneath the murky water. One of the men retched. The puddled surface trembled, though no wind stirred. Samchai crouched, his hand hovering above the dark water. He could see nothing below the surface, only depthless black reflecting the dull gray sky. A bubble rose. Then another. They burst with soft, wet pops, releasing a faint smell of decay. Behind him, someone whispered, "The earth has eaten." The words spread through the group like cold through wet cloth. No one contradicted it. As they turned back toward the village, Samchai felt a strange heaviness beneath his feet, as though the ground had softened into something not entirely solid. Each step seemed to sink slightly deeper than it should. The rain continued without pause. That night, sleep brought no rest. Across Ban Phra Nam, villagers dreamed the same dream. They stood ankle-deep in black water beneath a sky without stars. The surface around them rippled gently, disturbed by movement below. When they looked down, pale shapes drifted beneath their feet, faces suspended in darkness. Eyes closed, mouths slack, hair floating like drowned weeds. One by one, the eyes opened. Not in alarm. Not in anger. But in recognition. The dreamers tried to move, but the water thickened, clinging to their legs. Beneath the surface, hands began to rise slowly, fingers pale and bloated, reaching upward with patient certainty. Samchai awoke choking on a scream. His sleeping mat was damp. For a moment he thought the rain had entered the house. Then he realized the moisture clung only to his legs, streaked with dark mud that smelled faintly of stagnant water. Across the village, other doors slid open. Lanterns flickered to life. No one spoke of the dream. Yet in every household, people washed their feet in silence, and watched the murky water in their basins swirl slowly, as if stirred by something unseen. Outside, the rain continued to fall. And beneath the flooded fields of Ban Phra Nam, the softened earth settled and shifted, as though adjusting itself around what it had begun to swallow. Chapter 12. The Shared Dream. The rain did not weaken. It did not strengthen. It simply continued, a steady descent that blurred time and eroded the boundary between day and night. The sky remained a flat, oppressive gray, and the sun existed only as a pale brightness diffused behind unmoving clouds. By the third day, Ban Phra Nam felt less like a village and more like something submerged. Water crept into thresholds, bamboo floors remained damp beneath bare feet, clothing never fully dried. The air carried a persistent smell of wet soil and stagnant water, as though the flooded fields had begun to breathe into every home. No one spoke of leaving. The road beyond the valley had dissolved into deep mud. Wheels sank, footsteps vanished. It was as if the rain had sealed the village within its own drowning boundary. But it was the dreams that bound them most tightly. At first, villagers avoided mentioning them, People moved through the day with hollow eyes and tight jaws, offering only nods in place of conversation. Yet silence cannot contain what repeats. By the fourth morning, the truth surfaced. They were dreaming together. Each night, they found themselves standing in the flooded fields beneath a sky devoid of stars. The water reached their ankles, warm, thick, and faintly viscous, clinging to their skin like diluted oil. The surface reflected no moon, no clouds, only a dim and depthless darkness. They stood without speaking, aware of one another yet unable to turn their heads. Below the surface, shapes drifted. At first the shapes were indistinct, pale blurs shifting in the black water. Then came the faces. Dozens. Eyes closed, mouths slack, skin swollen and colorless, suspended as though the water itself preserved them. Each night, more faces appeared. Hair floated like weeds in slow currents that should not exist. Some faces were ancient, their features softened by time. Others were newly familiar, their expressions caught in the stillness between breath and silence. On the fifth night, someone began to scream in the dream. No sound emerged. The water thickened. The faces began to open their eyes. Not all at once. One. Then another. Then many. Their gazes did not accuse. They recognized. The dreamers tried to step backward, but their feet would not move. The black water had deepened, rising slowly up their calves. Beneath the surface, pale hands stirred, drifting upward with gentle, inevitable motion. When Sanchai awoke, he found himself gripping the edge of his sleeping mat so tightly his fingers had gone numb. Outside, lanterns flickered in neighboring houses. Doors slid open. People stepped into the rain, staring at one another with hollow recognition. No explanation was needed. The same images lived behind every pair of eyes. Luang Por Chai rang the temple bell that morning, a hollow, trembling sound that spread weakly through the damp air. Villagers gathered beneath the sagging eaves of the hall, rain dripping steadily from the roof's broken edges. "They are not dreams," the monk said quietly. "They are memories." A murmur moved through the crowd. "Memories of what?" someone asked. He looked toward the flooded fields. "Of what the earth has taken." A child began to cry. Sanchai's gaze drifted to Molly, who stood apart from the others, rain soaking her hair and clothing without apparent discomfort. "They are waiting," she said. "For what?" Sanchai asked, his voice hoarse. Her eyes lifted toward the dark water pooling beyond the village. "To be remembered." The rain struck the temple roof with steady insistence. Beyond the gathering, the flooded fields lay still and black, their surfaces smooth as glass. Yet at the far edge of the water, faint ripples spread outward in slow circles, as though something moved beneath, something patient, shifting closer night by night. And when darkness fell again, the villagers would return to the same field, the same water, the same silent assembly of faces waiting below. Each night, the water rose a little higher.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. The Monk Who Walked into the Water. On the sixth day of rain, the bell at Wat Nong Kham rang before dawn. The sound was thin and uneven, carried through the wet air like something fragile struggling to exist. It woke the villagers one by one, pulling them from restless sleep and unfinished dreams. Many lay still for a moment, hoping the ringing would stop. It did not. By the time they reached the temple grounds, the rain had softened into a fine gray veil. The world felt muffled, as though wrapped in damp cloth. Luang Por Chai stood at the edge of the flooded fields. He wore his saffron robe despite the rain, the fabric darkened and heavy with water. Prayer beads hung from his fingers. His bare feet were already sunk ankle-deep in mud. Sanchai approached cautiously. "Luang Por, what are you doing?" The old monk did not turn. "It is not finished," he said. The words seemed to dissolve in the mist. "The bargain was opened," he continued. "It must be closed." Behind them, villagers gathered in uneasy silence. No one stepped closer to the waterline. The flooded field lay unnaturally still, its surface smooth and dark, reflecting the dull sky like polished stone. "You warned us," Sanchai said, his voice tight. "Tell us how to end it." Luang Por Chai lifted the prayer beads, the wooden spheres clicking softly together. What has awakened remembers the old paths. He murmured. It does not release what it has taken unless the living call the boundary closed. He stepped forward. The water accepted his foot without ripple. A faint murmur moved through the crowd. Luang Por, stop, someone whispered. He did not. He moved slowly into the flooded field. Each step deliberate, each breath visible in the cool damp air. The water rose to his calves. Then his knees. His robe spread around him like diluted saffron smoke drifting across the surface. He began to chant. The words were ancient, older than the temple, older than the village. Each syllable seemed to vibrate through the water rather than above it. The sound spread outward in slow rains, disturbing the black surface in gentle concentric ripples. The villagers felt pressure in their ears. The rain softened further, as if listening. Somchai stepped forward instinctively, but Molly caught his wrist. Do not interrupt, she whispered. Her fingers were cold. Luang Por Chai reached the center of the flooded field, the place where the ritual column now stood half submerged. Its red cloth drifting slowly in the dark water. He lifted his face toward the low sky and chanted louder. For a moment, the air seemed to tighten. The water trembled. Beneath the surface, pale shapes flickered into view, drifting just below the monk's knees. The outlines were indistinct, like reflections seen through smoked glass. The chanting did not falter. The shapes drew closer. Somchai's breath caught in his throat. Hands. Faint. Colorless. Rising slowly through the water. The monk's voice strengthened, defiant and unwavering. The surface broke around his legs in widening rings as the shapes pressed nearer, as if drawn by the vibration of sacred sound. The villagers watched in frozen silence. Then the chanting stopped. Not gradually. Abruptly. Luang Por Chai's beads slipped from his fingers and vanished into the black water without a sound. For one suspended instant, he stood perfectly still. Then his body jerked. The surface around him bulged. Something beneath the water shifted, vast, deliberate. His shoulders dipped. Somchai lunged forward, but the mud seized his feet. The monk's mouth opened as if to speak. No sound emerged. He sank. Not with the thrashing panic of drowning, but with slow, irresistible descent, as though hands beneath the surface guided him downward with patient certainty. The water closed above his head. Silence swallowed the field. Only widening ripples marked where he had stood. A saffron fold of cloth rose briefly to the surface, unfurling like a dying flame before drifting away across the black water. No one moved. No one cried out. Even the rain seemed to pause. Then, beneath the surface, a deep, slow movement passed through the flooded field, spreading outward in a widening pulse that rocked the water against the softened banks. Molly stared into the rippling dark. They remember him now, she whispered. Somchai felt something inside his chest tighten, as though the valley itself had exhaled and taken a part of them with it. The rain resumed its steady fall. And beneath the surface of the field, the water darkened, not with mud, but with depth, as though something below had shifted to make room for what it had just received. Chapter 14. The Price of Rain. The rain did not cease after the monk vanished. It fell with the same relentless steadiness, blurring the line between sky and earth until Ban Phra Nam seemed suspended in a gray, dripping void. The temple bell did not ring again. No one returned to the flooded field that day. Yet everyone felt its presence. The absence of Luang Por Chai settled over the village like a second storm, heavier than the rain. Harder to breathe through. His sandals remained at the temple steps. His prayer beads did not resurface. His chanting lingered in memory, unfinished. By afternoon, the water had risen to the thresholds of several homes. Rice stores were moved to higher shelves. Sleeping mats were rolled and hung. Chickens perched on rafters rather than the ground. The village moved in quiet, efficient motions, each person avoiding the eyes of the others, as though acknowledgement might confirm what they all feared. The rain had come, and it would not leave. Somchai spread the brittle leather manuscript across the temple floor, its cracked surface damp from the air. Villagers gathered around him, their faces drawn and hollow. He read the remaining passages again and again, searching for guidance in the faded ink. Offerings. Blood. The awakening. But the final section remained torn. At the bottom edge, barely legible beneath water stains, a later hand had scrawled a warning. When the rain answers, the debt must be returned. Returned. The word seemed to pulse against his vision. What debt? An elder whispered. No one spoke the answer. Outside, the flooded fields lay still and black beneath the gray sky. The ritual column leaned slightly now, half submerged, its red cloth drifting like a wound unraveling in slow motion. That evening, the children grew restless. They complained of hearing voices beneath the sound of rain, soft murmurs threading through the darkness under their floors. Mothers hushed them, but more than one adult paused, listening, certain they too had heard faint syllables rising through the bamboo planks. Near midnight, a sound woke Sank. Laughter. Soft. Childlike. It drifted across the rain-soaked air, thin as breath. He stepped outside. Lantern light flickered in neighboring homes. Others had heard it too. The sound seemed to come from the direction of the flooded fields. A small figure stood at the edge of the water. "Molly?" he called. The child did not turn. She walked forward slowly, her bare feet entering the black flood without hesitation. Ripples spread outward from her steps, distorting the reflection of the gray sky. Sank hurried after her, mud sucking at his ankles. "Molly, stop." The laughter continued, not from her, but from the water ahead. High and distant. As if many children whispered joyfully from beneath the surface. She stopped knee-deep in the flood and tilted her head, listening. "They're lonely," she said. The rain softened to a fine mist, hanging in the air like breath. Sank reached the water's edge but could not step further. The surface before him seemed darker than the surrounding flood, thick and depthless, as though the ground fell away into a well of moving shadow. "Molly, come back," he pleaded. She looked over her shoulder. For an instant, lightning flickered beyond the clouds, not a jagged strike, but a dull illumination that revealed her face pale and strangely calm. "They gave us rain," she said. The water around her stirred. "We must give them someone to remember." The surface broke in widening rings. Pale shapes drifted upward beneath her feet. Sank lunged forward, but the mud seized him to the calves, holding him fast. "Molly." The child turned back toward the dark water. The laughter rose, layered and echoing. Hands formed beneath the surface, small, pale, reaching. The water rose around her waist. Her outline blurred in the dim gray light. Then she was gone. The surface closed without a splash. Only expanding ripples marked where she had stood. The laughter faded. Sank collapsed into the mud, his cries swallowed by the rain. Behind him, villagers stood frozen along the bank, their faces hollow with dawning comprehension. The dead had been named. And the rain continued to fall.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The Village That Sank. The rain continued for 7 days and 7 nights. It did not rage like a storm. It did not flash or thunder. It simply fell, steady, patient, unending, as though the sky had opened a wound that refused to close. By the 7th morning, Ban Phra Nam no longer resembled a village. Water had swallowed the narrow paths between houses. Bamboo walls stood darkened and warped, their reflections wavering in black floodwater that crept steadily higher. The temple steps disappeared beneath the surface. The spirit house at the edge of the settlement leaned at an impossible angle before slowly collapsing into the murky water without a sound. No carts could enter. No footsteps could leave. Beyond the valley, the road dissolved into a sea of mud that pulled at boots and wheels with sucking insistence. As if the land itself resisted escape. Inside the remaining dry homes, the villagers spoke in hushed tones, as though raising their voices might draw attention from beneath the water. No one mentioned Molly, no one spoke the monk's name, yet absence weighed heavier than grief. At night, the dreams returned. The water now reached their knees. The field beneath the starless sky stretched wider each time they entered it. As though the land itself were expanding into endless darkness. Beneath the surface, The pale faces drifted closer, their open eyes reflecting dim, wavering light from no visible source. More faces appeared each night. Some newly remembered. Some not. Hands brushed against their legs in slow, searching passes, leaving trails of cold that lingered long after waking. On the seventh night, the dreams ended abruptly. Sanchai awoke to silence. The rain had stopped. He sat upright, heart pounding, straining to hear the familiar drumming on the roof. Nothing answered. The stillness felt unnatural, heavier than the storm that had preceded it. He slid open the door. Fog lay thick over the valley, pale and unmoving. The air smelled of wet earth and something faintly stagnant, as though the floodwater had grown too deep to breathe. Other doors opened. Villagers emerged slowly, drawn by the same uneasy quiet. Together, they walked toward the flooded fields. Where the paddies had been, a wide basin of black water stretched across the valley floor. The ritual column was gone. The boundary markers had vanished. Even the skeletal trees at the far edge of the fields were submerged to their lowest branches. The water did not ripple. It lay smooth and opaque, reflecting the gray sky like polished stone. Samchai stepped forward. The mud no longer clung to his feet. The ground beneath the thin water at the bank felt firm, packed, settled, as though something beneath had shifted and sealed. A faint shape drifted just below the surface. Then another. Pale form suspended in the depths, barely visible through the dark water. Someone behind him began to sob. From the far side of the basin came a hollow sound. Thump. The villagers froze. The sound rolled slowly across the water and faded into the mist. No drum stood in the field. No figure moved along the shore. Yet the sound came again, faint and distant, as if carried upward through deep layers of earth and water. Thump. Molly's voice seemed to echo in Samchai's memory. They're lonely. A cold wind moved across the basin, wrinkling the surface at last. For an instant, the reflections shattered, and beneath them, dozens of pale shapes shifted in slow unison before sinking back into darkness. The fog thickened. By the time the first rescue team reached the valley 2 days later, guided by reports of flooding, Ban Phra Nam was gone. Where the village had stood lay only a broad depression filled with dark water and silt. No houses, no temple, no shrine, no footprints. Only a silent basin reflecting an empty sky. Local villagers from neighboring districts would later refuse to cross the area at night. Farmers claimed their buffalo shied away from the soil. During dry seasons, when the water receded, the earth beneath was said to remain unnaturally damp, and pocked with shallow depressions shaped like footprints that filled with black water even under the fiercest sun. And in years when drought returned, when the land cracked and the air grew heavy with waiting, some swore they heard a distant drum echoing from beneath the fields. Slow. Patient. Remembering. On windless nights, if one stands at the edge of the basin and listens closely, a child's voice may drift across the darkened ground. Do you want the rain? The silence that follows stretches long enough to make the listener doubt what they heard. Then, softly, or do you want to live? The rain came. It filled the fields, silenced the dust, and erased the drought that had broken the land. But Ban Phra Nam was never seen again. In seasons of dry wind and cracking earth, locals still avoid the basin where the village once stood. They say the soil there never truly dries, and that distant drumbeats sometimes rise from beneath the ground. If you ever hear a child's voice carried across a windless field asking whether you want the rain, listen carefully before you answer. Some bargains are still waiting to be completed.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.